I've played a lot of games, and although I know what to expect from certain styles of games or genres, there are still video game moments that hit me really hard in life, times where I had to sit down the controller, just kind of take a minute, maybe go through some emotions like sadness, awe, or even confusion, maybe a combination of all three of those. Now this video is a Firefighter giveaway episode selected by Jeff Daigle, who offered me a dealer's choice. And this is something I've wanted to talk about for a while, so if you feel like sitting down and listening to my memories, pull up a chair. Now I will say I'm going to address specific moments in video games, and as such, there might be spoilers for games that you haven't played. If you're sensitive to that, then you might want to avoid this episode. I usually don't do this, but down in the description below, I'm going to list the games that I'm going to talk about today. That way you know what to expect and you can watch the episode without stepping on a proverbial landmine. Right? That being said, let's begin. As a kid, Ocarina of Time was my favorite game, and in terms of adventure and storytelling, it was one of the first times I truly felt involved with the people that I was talking to, mentally and physically invested in the quest that had been bestowed upon me. The first hour of Ocarina of Time is a tutorial mixed with the introduction of the lore of Hyrule. We also get our first true objective to leave the forest and seek the 3 spiritual stones to open the doors to the Temple of Time. We're kind of conflicted in doing that too, because our friends in the Kokiri forest told us that if a Kokiri leaves the forest, they die. So already, mentally, me being 7 or 8 years old, I was concerned about leaving it. When I did, that's when the emotions started coming. On the bridge, we are met by Saria, who shares an emotional moment with us. No music, just ambient sounds. In the end, we end up turning our back on everything we know to go explore the unknown world, and as a kid, that was monumental. I'll be honest with you, many of the moments that I'm going to talk about today, they involve the death of a key player in the game, right? That's how emotions are drawn out from me, by loss. And when I played Telltale's The Walking Dead, I was so new to the military, so blind, so unaware that I would lose so many of my friends. And through time, that kind of molded me into who I am now. It made me unaffected by the loss of those that I loved. In layman's terms, it came with the territory. In The Walking Dead Season 1, we play as Lee Everett, and one of the aspects that I enjoy about Telltale-styled games is that you have the ability to make choices, and those choices affect the events of the game, be it how people react in conversation to you or certain events that might occur. To me, it felt like when you're in that position, you truly assume the role of the individual that you're controlling, and you don't realize it. And then after all of this effort of making sure you do everything right, you die at the end. It's a rather emotional scene with Clementine and Lee, and I cried like a bitch. I'm not afraid to say that I did. There was one moment in Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare, the original one, that captivated me as a child, and that was the death of Sergeant Paul Jackson. I don't recall the name of the mission, but at one point you're in whatever Middle Eastern locale the game takes place in, and a nuke is detonated, and the entire sequence that unfolds is you walking forward just surrounded by death. You see a mushroom cloud off in the distance, and eventually you fall over and die. As a kid, I was like, whoa, that's heavy. But as an adult, I took it much more seriously. I knew this scene was coming when I was going through my library prior to my streaming career, and I knew what was going on in the Middle East and how people were exposed to so much trauma at the behest of someone behind a desk, right? Seeing that moment unfold as an adult, with the military experience that I had at the time, I felt the heat of that nuke, the solemn acceptance that it was over, right? The realization of Sergeant Paul that nobody was going to come save him, and in the end, I like to think that maybe he thought it wasn't worth it to be a cogwheel in the military-industrial machine. I remember just staring at the screen, wondering if that's how my friends who fell during combat operations felt. I even put down the controller and walked outside for a smoke. It was rough. When you think of JRPGs with some emotional undertones, Breath of Fire doesn't really come to mind, right? In some ways, Breath of Fire is the JRPG I tell people to play when they want a good, solid entry-level JRPG, because it's not inherently difficult, it's rather linear, and the grind factor isn't nearly as high as some of the other JRPGs of the era, especially on the Super Nintendo. The sequel? It's slightly more difficult in my opinion, and much like its predecessor, we gather or acquire a group of companions, one of which, in number 2, is named Rand. Rand is a member of the Shell clan, and when the events of Evrai at the St. Ava Church unfold, Rand's mother, Daisy, gets kidnapped, and obviously we have to go and save her. The problem is, we wander into a sliding wall trap. Rand being big and strong, he decides to sacrifice himself and hold the wall back so that everyone can pass. We see him slowly lose strength, and then out of nowhere, his mother Daisy comes and joins the struggle to push the wall back, before pushing him out of the way and sacrificing herself to save the life of her son, which was abstract because if you've been playing Breath of Fire 2, you would know that Daisy was an absolute cunt to her son. Never once said I love you, never once said thank you, tough love 101. But in those final moments, she finally calls him a good boy. It's very powerful for what it was. I'll be honest with you, I knew what this game was about before I ever played it, because I came from the era where I watched PewDiePie and Markiplier, so I had experienced this game vicariously through them, if that makes sense. And I thought that because I knew exactly what would happen, I would just be playing the game on the stream, right? No, I was wrong. Horribly wrong, actually. The ending made me cry. To the Moon is a magical game with a strong, emotional story, and the characters that we portray all but go through the entirety of a man's life to help him accomplish his wish, to go to the moon. The company's name is Sigmund Core, likely a play on Sigmund Freud, but it's more like Make-A-Wish on crack, because they're able to intercept and enter the memories of the people they help, and in the case of Johnny, like I said, we go through his whole life, up until he dies. And for me to tell you the entire story, or what exactly happens, would be a disservice to you as someone who could play this game on your own time. I don't want to ruin your experience, because To the Moon is a masterpiece. I suffer from borderline personality disorder, and one of the key aspects of BPD is the constant worry that you're disappointing somebody, be it a family member, a friend, your employer. You're always concerned about how people perceive you. And personally, I go to therapy for it, cognitive behavioral therapy, which is something I suggest to all of my friends, because as a science, cognitive behavioral therapy is a wonderful approach to understanding how we perceive things, right? Check it out. If cognitive behavioral therapy could be a video game, it would be the Artful Escape. Through and through, this game questions the trichotomy between what we want to accomplish in life, what we should have accomplished in life, and what is expected of us. It wraps us up in this existential crisis, and it ushers us into another dimension of understanding. And while the game itself isn't that great, I still hold it in exceptional regard for teaching me to accept that I don't have to impress anybody. I don't need to impress anybody. When I make videos, I make them for you, not robots. I could care less if I get one view on a video if I knew that it made one person's day a little bit better. If you get a chance to play the Artful Escape, do it. If you've played Final Fantasy VI or III, if you go by American numbering conventions, there's a significant plot point or momentum break that involves Celeste participating in an opera. In fact, if there ever was a moment where I would be forced to break my momentum, I would love for it to be consistently like this, because the opera sequence alone is worth its weight in gold, and is one of the many moments in Final Fantasy VI that make the game the golden standard that I regard it as. We sing a gorgeous opera composed by Nobuo Uematsu, and for a brief moment, we're lifted away to a spectacular musical experience. If you manage to mess up during the aria di mezzo carattere, don't be disappointed in yourself. A lot of us did it on purpose just to hear the song again. And if you played the Pixel Remaster, you're in for a treat. It's a beautiful moment, in a game filled to the brim with the most powerful exposition I've encountered in a JRPG. You'll hear me say often that the Redemption series is a perfect example of how Rockstar is capable of creating a wonderful universe that stories can just naturally unfold in, and they do such a phenomenal job of paying attention to the most basic details. And in Red Dead Redemption 1, to me, it was a mixture of a few things, right? The nature of the Wild Wild West, and the betrayal of John Marston, which was really shitty. Really shitty. And what's shitty about it is that you might not realize that's happening every single day behind the scenes in our culture. Hell, even the world's culture. Having somebody do all of your dirty work, then you cut the final loose end, that's what Red Dead Redemption was. John Marston redeeming himself, trying to seek freedom from his past, freeing his family, which obviously is expanded upon in Red Dead Redemption 2, going through and working for the Pinkertons to decimate your previous gang. And after we kill them all, we're met outside the barn where the Pinkertons show their true intentions. And we make our final stand there, with one last full Deadeye Gage for taking the helm as his son Jack for a few extra missions to continue the tragic irony of the cycle of violence that led to his dad's death by killing Edgar Ross in a duel. Red Dead Redemption is a gem, it's truly a masterpiece from Rockstar, and I do hope to one day finally beat Red Dead Redemption 2. It's been on my list for a while. A lot of people don't like Mass Effect 3, and I can understand why. It was a fairly underwhelming ending to a trilogy of games that followed the exploits of Commander Shepard, going up against seemingly biblical-sized monstrosities that you would only expect to see at the end time of humanity. But the one moment from the franchise that made me feel a certain way was the death of Mordin. There's a lot of stuff that goes into saving Mordin in Mass Effect 3, and it can be convoluted. We have to kill Rex in Mass Effect 1, then we have to complete Mordin's loyalty mission in Mass Effect 2 to include destroying data concerning the genophage. And he needs to survive that suicide mission, and that's all just in Mass Effect 2. In Mass Effect 3, we need to save Eve from Cerberus, talk to Mordin, get a transmission from Solarian Dalatras about the cure being sabotaged, and don't tell Mordin about that because he's such a great scientist, he'll find a workaround, thus not being able to save him in the end. It's a lot of stuff to do over 3 games, and most people won't do every single part of that, and instead, they'll see Mordin die. He'll sacrifice himself to spread the cure for the genophage, and he'll sing his silly little song. I am the very model of a scientist Solarian, which if you're a music nerd like me, you'd recognize that from the Pirates of Penzance. It's a musical. One game ending that kind of made me frustrated in a good way was the ending of Halo Reach. I can't recall the exact details of all the other endings of the Halo titles because they were just shooters to me, but Halo Reach? It was the first time I was shown an idea, at least in a video game, where the good guys don't win. In fact, it's one of the only games where you watch every single one of your friends die in selfless acts of courage. Jorge sacrifices himself to blow up the engine of a Covenant Corvette, Kat gets shot by a sniper, Carter sacrifices himself so that Noble Six and Emil can get away with Cortana, Emil gets ganked, and finally we see a last stand with Six getting overrun. At the end, we get a pleasant yet bleak eulogy from Dr. Halsey that sets us up for the events of Halo Combat Evolved, and we see Six's helmet lying in the grass, untouched for years. That was a powerful way of ending a game. Truly powerful, still sticks with me to this day. And these are just 10 moments in a string of memories that I have about video games. Are there any that stuck with you? It would bring me eternal joy to read about them in the comment section below. If you watch this video to its completion, then you're already home. Feel free to hit that subscribe button and become a part of a wonderful community of folks who just really enjoy remembering a time when life was a little bit easier to live. Also, if you don't mind, hit that thumbs up button. Helps bring visibility to the channel and the projects that I work on every single day. As always, from my family to your family, good energy, good vibes. Fortefyre out.